On a cold evening in late March of 1922, silence surrounded the isolated farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck. It stood alone among the fields of Bavaria, Germany, miles away from the nearest village, its buildings dark against the pale sky. To the casual observer, it looked like any other rural farm of the time: weathered wood, a small courtyard, a barn attached to the living quarters, and fields that had endured generations of labor. But something about the place felt wrong, even before anyone knew what had happened there. Hinterkaifeck was home to the Gruber family. Andreas Gruber, a stern and controlling man in his early 60s, owned the farm. He lived there with his wife, Cecilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, and Victoria's two children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Also living with them was a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived only hours before the tragedy that would claim all their lives. The farm had always been somewhat isolated, but isolation was nothing new for rural families in post-World War I Germany. What was unusual were the things Andreas Gruber had been noticing in the weeks leading up to the murders, things he told few people about, and which would later become central to the mystery. Several days before the killings, Andreas found strange footprints in the snow leading from the forest toward the farm. The tracks stopped abruptly at the edge of the property. There were no footprints leading back into the woods. Whoever had come had not left the same way. Andreas searched the surrounding area but found no one. Then there were the sounds, footsteps in the attic at night, slow, deliberate movements above the ceiling, as if someone were walking back and forth. Andreas searched the attic but found nothing. No intruder, no animal, nothing disturbed. Keys began disappearing. Doors that were normally locked were found open. Tools were moved without explanation. Andreas believed someone was watching the farm, possibly living nearby, or worse, inside the building itself. Despite these warnings, the family did not leave. They did not report the incidents to the police. Life continued. On March 31st, 1922, Maria Baumgartner arrived at Hinterkaifeck to begin her job as the family's new maid. She had been hesitant to accept the position after hearing rumors that the previous maid had quit because the house was haunted. But she needed the work. She arrived with her belongings and was never seen alive again. That same night, something terrible happened inside the barn. The murders were not discovered until 4 days later, on April 4th. Neighbors grew concerned when the Gruber family failed to appear at church and their children did not attend school. A neighbor, accompanied by 2 men, went to check on the farm. What they found would shock an entire nation. Inside the barn, partially hidden under hay, lay 4 bodies. Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and little Cecilia, the 7-year-old child. They had been killed one by one, lured into the barn, and murdered with a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe. The position of the bodies suggested a horrifying sequence. One person was attacked, then another came to investigate, only to be killed in turn. The child showed signs of having survived for several hours after the attack, tearing out clumps of her own hair in agony before dying. But the horror did not end in the barn. Inside the house, investigators found the bodies of the maid, Maria Baumgartner, and the toddler Joseph. Maria had been killed in her bed. Joseph was found dead in his crib. Every member of the household was dead. What made the crime even more disturbing was what appeared to have happened afterward. The killer, or killers, did not flee immediately. Evidence suggested that someone had stayed on the farm for days after the murders. Livestock had been fed, meals had been eaten, fires had been lit. The bodies were covered carefully, almost respectfully. Nothing of value was stolen. There were no signs of forced entry. And perhaps most chilling of all, the killer seemed to know the farm intimately. The police investigation was chaotic and deeply flawed. Curious villagers walked through the crime scene before authorities arrived, contaminating evidence. Bodies were moved, objects were touched, the barn was disturbed. Crucial details were lost forever. The weapon was found on the property, hidden in the attic, blood-stained, cleaned poorly, as if the killer had attempted to remove evidence but had not rushed. The police questioned dozens of suspects, neighbors, former lovers, traveling workers, even members of the family themselves posthumously accused of unspeakable acts. Rumors spread quickly. There were whispers of incest between Andreas and his daughter Victoria. Court records confirmed that years earlier, Andreas had been convicted of incest and served a prison sentence. Victoria's husband had died in the war, and the paternity of her youngest child, Joseph, was widely debated. Some believed Andreas was the father, others suspected a local man. Motive, however, remained elusive. If the crime was driven by jealousy, why kill everyone? If it was robbery, why leave money behind? If it was revenge, why stay afterward? One suspect was a former farmhand with a violent past. Another was a neighbor who had disputes with Andreas. None could be conclusively tied to the murders. As the months passed, leads dried up. The case grew colder. Hinterkaifeck itself was eventually demolished. The land was reclaimed by nature. The place where 6 people had died brutally was erased from the map. But the questions never went away. Who was living in the attic before the murders? Who left footprints in the snow but never left again? Who fed the animals after killing an entire family? And why did no one hear the screams? To this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain officially unsolved. Files were reopened decades later. Modern profiling was applied. Still, no definitive answer emerged. The silence of the farm endured. And somewhere, hidden in forgotten records and unspoken memories, the truth remained buried, unheard, untold, waiting.